live. Preparing to live stream the meeting. You guys, I haven't been this nervous since Salt Lake.
Yeah, right.
All right, I think we're officially live. Nervous since.
Awesome. Does it say that on there?
Yeah, exactly. It starts there. Well, anyway, this is going to be fun. So Mia, Lindsay, great to have you guys here. I know that last time we were all in the same spot was Salt Lake back in January. We did a kickoff together. So today's topic that we're going to just start chatting through is some best practices around managing distractions when working remote. How do you set up your space? What are the things to consider, even on time management pieces? So I know that you both have been working remote for a little while now, but for everybody that is just starting to do that, what is the one bit of advice that you wish you knew when you first started working remote that now you know?
Okay, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that, you know, you hear a lot of times about people getting sort of depressed working from home because there's this phenomenon that when you get ready and you go to an office, you're getting your hair done, you're putting your clothes on, you're like leaving your house. And so when you're going to like the kitchen table or to the nook in the kitchen, or sometimes it's a couch with a little tabletop for your laptop, it can be really disheartening because you're like, well, why should I get ready? Because, you know, I'm not going to meetings. So I think like actually having distinct attire to wear, like I'm going to work, at least for me, I've found that to be really important, and that I feel more official. So then my productivity is so much better. So yeah, that's my one.
Well, do you, is it the feeling of being like fully dressed that does it? Or is it the presentation of how you look on video? Like, is it okay to wear a collared shirt up top and maybe some jogging pants or daytime jammies below?
Okay, so I have a very strong opinion that as well. I've actually tried to take a more like, you know, substantial shirt that I'm wearing if I'm presenting or in a client meeting. But if I put something like yoga pants on the bottom, it feels really weird. Now, technically, like in the news, you could just like be done from here up and then nobody knows what's below. But it's about the feeling that we feel. And if I feel professional and I feel like I'm efficient and I'm like showing up for something, I think it changes your productivity massively. At least that's what I've noticed for me. Lindsay, I don't know about you.
No, Mia, I agree with you 100%. I think the way you feel and the way you carry yourself is so important. And so that ties in a little bit to my one thing too, that if done correctly, you absolutely can connect with people just as much on video as you can, you know, if you were there live with them. So I think in dressing the part and feeling really confident and presenting yourself in that light is going to help you feel more authentic when you're genuinely connecting with these people. So I feel like with the right things and learning, for me, like eye contact when you're on video is looking at the camera, and it's distracting if there's a lot of people on your screen, because if you're looking at somebody else, it could be taken that you're maybe multitasking or doing something else. So connecting with people is just as effective when you're on video, but you have to look at the camera. So that's one of my big takeaways too for working remotely.
That's a super hard thing to do. It's taken me a lot of practice to focus on it because I get so distracted and want to look at myself, or like, how's my hair looking? And I read a stat that was really interesting. It was when people just start doing video conferences, about 80% or more of the time is spent looking at themselves on video. And that is something that I think we have to accept and realize that we're going to try and look at that right away. But I just realized there's another distraction that just came up, is the iMessage notification. So if I'm working from my computer, it's really important to turn off those type of notifications. I don't know how to do it on PC, but on Mac, it's that top right 3 horizontal bars, then scroll down and then turn on the do not disturb. I think that's a very easy thing to forget about, but it can distract, especially when you're on a big meeting. So what are some other things, other tips that we should be aware of to avoid distractions like that?
I think going on what you just said too, I think that you treat this virtual meeting the same as you would treat an in-person meeting. So having your notifications off, but also not having your phone right on you or be typing. I think it's a huge distraction, especially if people are listening and they hear you typing, they're gonna disengage with you because it feels like you're not present with them. So I think treating these meetings the same as you treat an in-person meeting.
Yeah, and I mean these things are like distractions, I think are the pitfall to us being able to be focused because there, and again, I don't know the perfect stats either, but I know that there's a phenomenon of some study that was done where it was like the actual amount of truly productive hours of work that you get done is something like 3 hours and something minutes or so. And then they did this breakdown of everything else that people are doing, like walking around the water cooler, like, checking other message channels and things like that. And so if we can minimize those distractions, like you're saying, Dan, like turn off those notifications and have like a capturing system. So even if a thought comes in your head, like I'll write down, like, oh my gosh, I need to think about that client and send them that message. I'll have like a physical piece of paper, like literally what I call my physical inbox, and I'll write it down, and then I'll visit it later when I'm able to give it that headspace. So I think there's the priorities of others that come through, and it's like, oh, not only the pings and the dings, but also like the ones that you need to do, but it's like it's not for your zone of what you're focusing on at that moment. So
Yeah, I think that's also very easy. It's the issue of urgent but not important. And then some people else that it is important and urgent doesn't necessarily make it in that quadrant for yourself. And even today, I know, Mia, there's a project that, well, all three of us that we're working on, that I've had 3 one-on-one calls and then looped in for a group meeting after. And it's taken up a huge amount of the day that was not on my radar when I woke up this morning. And so now I have this sense of there were other things I needed to get done, but this ended up needing to get escalated where someone else's urgent and important did become my urgent and important. And that was a decision that I made. So now I have to reprioritize other things or make sure that I manage that. But if you don't do that consciously, it's very easy to feel like you're extremely busy going task to task to task. But then at least I'm feeling a little guilty. Like I have my little guy is like down for a nap right now. I'm making a little fuss. I got my dog that's not used to not going to the dog park. And so some of these things that are important for work, I now have to manage the other distractions in my life. And even though I can reprioritize it, it still is weighing on me a little bit. And do you guys have any best practices? Because I know across the world, everybody is dealing with this new way of thinking about work and family, distractions, guilt. What are some tips that you guys have seen or shared?
I think good old fashioned checklists with this, because I think being able to prioritize and to physically see yourself making progress, and then you can look at things that are maybe urgent but not as important, or not as important but urgent, so whatever quadrant that falls in for you. So being able to look at the day, and so this can be both work and personal since everything kind of blends in these days with us all being at home. I think physically being able to look at and prioritize and check off as you go through is going to give you, number one, a sense of accomplishment, but it'll also keep you on task.
So I was listening to these podcasts that I listen to daily, and the woman specifically talked about thinking about your day in like segments, almost like in little buckets. And so I love the quote that I heard about you cannot manage what you don't measure. That's just my favorite of all favorites. And so I've actually gone pretty nerd-like into some data collection where I actually have a log of every single thing that I do from wake to sleep. And what this has shown me is I'm like, wow, I needed that 15 minutes of transition time after that meeting to take it out of my head so that it can be clear to go into cooking mode, because I made that commitment to my family that I'm going to cook them lunch. And then now I'm like putting on this hat of like, I'm no longer the chef. Like now I'm going back into this other mode. And so, but I only ever could do that on a conscious level with all of my client work as well, until I actually had logged and knew how long I needed. Because it's more of a matrix of like call blocking, but it's like actually like task blocking but with data that's me specific. Because like my lunch or my how long I cook my broccoli and chickpeas and rice, like is like way faster because I have my processes. But like to somebody else, like if Lindsay's cooking up like an Italian, Italian meatballs for the family, like she's going to know how long it takes for her, but that's different for different people. So it's like, it's something that saved me. Like literally that would be my message to all.
Yeah,
Get your
that's
data.
one like amazing thing I've taken away from how you have coached me on thinking about time management differently is that we all, I guess like ever since I left school, it's like 9 to 5, you're working and you like show up and you're maximally productive every single minute that you can be, except for the 30-minute lunch. And I think this transition time is a very real concept that not a lot of people actually demark on their meetings or on their calendar. It's always like meeting back to back with other meetings, but there's a cost to that. You can't be at your most productive self if you don't build in those transition times, because ultimately you're going to have to transition anyway. And so now you're just robbing part of that time that you've set aside. Sometimes that can wing, like if you're having a one-on-one or catching up with somebody, then that could be a transition time in itself. And you could get two things at once, a social touch and a transition. But oftentimes, if it's business related, I really like what you phrased, even for cooking. It's like there's a transition to get out of business mode into family mode, and then a transition to get back in, which also gives leeway for example, my son not going down on time or not eating his bottle right away. And it just gives me that buffer. So I'm not chronically behind schedule for the entire day, which then leaves me feeling really like unproductive, even though I did get a lot of things done. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, any other tips on this topic?
Mia's the queen of time management. I've learned a lot from her too. So I tip my hat to you, Mia, on this subject for sure.
Well, okay. Well, let's transition to the next topic, working from home, which is something that I purposely put up, which is this virtual background. It has a lot of different things on the wall versus Lindsay. It's the opposite of what you have, which is a very plain background. And Mia, yours somewhere in between, but yours is not virtual. So let's talk about the trade-offs of that type of distraction, visual distraction, when we're working remote and doing these types of video meetings.
This is such, being at home it's obviously it's personalizing everything for everyone. So if I'm talking to somebody and I've known them in a work situation only, I'm seeing them in their house, whether you mean to or not, curiosity is getting the best of you. You're looking around at the back and you're like, oh wow, look at that art. Or, I didn't expect that their house would be decorated that way. Or, oh my gosh, that's, it's whether you mean to or not, it's a distraction when you're looking at somebody's house, or a background that's maybe not a totally clean background. I think it's also distracting if you're talking to somebody who has a cluttered background. So I think it's probably, since we're in kind of the world of distractions right now with all of us being home and us out of our element, I think it's more important now than ever to be really cognizant of your background and what people are seeing and what they're focusing time on, as opposed to what you were saying. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So I think about environment as, again, like you're saying, Lindsay, it's a place we go to have a meeting, just like when you go into a stellar office and they've got like beautiful plants in the middle of the building. It sort of has that wow, this is a beautiful space, or the doorways. So I think looking at all of the elements, I think if it's consciously chosen as part of the stage, like any good staging, then each prop has its time. I'll share a quick story, like with a client that I got to know really well over the course of 5 months. I probably wouldn't have parked myself in front of this background in the very beginning, but like as we got to be like a little more comfortable, I brought my meetings to this little nook here. And it was kind of funny because he had such a comfort talking to me. He's like, Mia, I just got to tell you, like that fan, it's just, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking you got this whole Japanese thing going on. And we had a huge laugh. It was like a really nice thing to connect with. But, maybe I should think about it differently. If it's like a first meeting, is this what I want to communicate? Is this helping me or is this hindering? Because there's no like good or bad prop. It's more like, what's the intent of the prop? just like, in a movie.
I think that's great advice. It's like, do it intentionally is the key. It's like, don't just assume that that's how your room is set up. I've had some really interesting trainings where I've been at a completely different location, and the actual room, like the hotel room I'm in or the random conference room, I got a table with a chair on top of it and then my computer there, and it's a whole thing. Like, it looks awful, but on camera, it's great because I've had that set up because I'm conscious of where I'm looking. Is my camera like way up and I'm looking up to you? Or is it, and you shouldn't ever do this, but like bad lighting and like looking down on people? So I think being very intentional with how everything is set up is such a great takeaway. And sometimes you make trade-offs. Like, I know my wife, she's doing a lot of, she's in healthcare and she's part of a lot of conference calls with doctors. They're, very professional and the best surgeons in the world talking about like very intense thing with residents that they're now like having to shadow and have these conversations in a completely different space. But they don't use this type of technology very much. So it's very funny to me of somebody who's very comfortable with Zoom and how to manage groups online, where these very professional, maybe not quite as tech savvy people as you would expect, have issues with muting other people. Like, they left an hour-long call and like one person at the end was like, oh, next time as the host, you can mute people that, and it's like, what? Why was that not already taken care of? Because you got like doctors, like one person on a virtual background doing a bike on there, but then like trying to be funny and like drinking wine on it. So it's like, wait, what are you doing? What kind of image are you trying to show? And it just felt a little bit off. And I think the same thing is happening too with video conference tools like Zoom that allow something amazing like these virtual backgrounds, but not all virtual backgrounds are created equal. Like this one that I'm using now is kind of designed to be like interesting. So something else to look at, like the lighting isn't like super off where it's like, wait, is it a dark room? Is that your actual room? And in different settings, if I make my lighting in a darker setting, I blend right in. Right now, I have a lot of bright light on me, so there's a pretty big contrast between my background. But I see a lot of people try and be funny with virtual backgrounds, but it can be really distracting. Like sometimes if I put up my like kid like this, it's like, whoa, what's going on? Versus if I have this background, it's like clear that I'm not actually in front of the Golden Gate. And so there's these trade-offs that we make with what you choose and the type of image that you want. So it's an internal meeting versus a client meeting. You have to be choosing your virtual background very consciously. So let's talk, what are best practices as people are trying to figure out what their backgrounds should be?
Well, I think, and going on this a little bit, so with background, and you kind of touched on this a little bit with lighting, when we're talking about being able and really attempting to connect with people the same way virtually as we do in real life, backlighting, if you have too much light from behind you and people can't see the expressions on your face, or they can't tell if you're reacting to something, it's a huge detriment to the feel of the group and to like the message that you're conveying. So I think as a part of the background, you have to think about the lighting and think about your facial expressions, because people want to see you react. They're not in the room with you, so they want to see a more exaggerated, just like Dan, you're displaying right now. It's really distracting. That in front of a window is probably the most common one that I know we all see. And it's hard because I'm trying to connect and I want to see your expressions. And if you have too much backlight, exactly like you're doing, it's nearly impossible.
And I feel some people do this on purpose and some people do it accidentally. But again, it's about intentionality. And if your reason for doing this is that you want to hide your face, that's actually a very negative message that you're sharing to everybody else who has their video on. So I think there is a win-win. Like, yeah, we all don't love how we look on video. And I think that's something that we can be very conscious of. But if you kind of see my background now, I left some of the cabinets open or some dishes on the table. Or if I go this way, it's kind of like, oh, what is that room? Like, what's in there? Why is it dark? And so these types of distractions can be like they can be very telling. For an informal chat like now, we're doing this on purpose and we have variations of what we're showing. But I think this is a really good lesson for everybody just starting to work from home, is be intentional. If you are, for example, taking your call from your bedroom, there are ways to not make it so obvious that it's your bed. And it kind of reminds me of that really funny video that went viral of this guy on BBC working from home. I'm sure you guys have seen it, but it's like the kid in the yellow jacket that just like walks in like all funny. And I just remember going back to that video a couple of weeks ago and realizing that, oh, this was his bedroom and that the bed was there, but he tried to kind of hide it by like putting out a blanket very cleanly with books in a very specific order. And so you didn't immediately know it. If you thought about it, like, yeah, you could tell. So I think there's are little tricks like that with how you can set up props. I think, Mia, that was a great way of describing it, where you set up props that have a purpose for the room that you're in. Anything else on this topic before we go into the next distraction?
I just was going to say, Dan, when you have filtered through your different virtual backgrounds, what was so cool about yours, and I think we've chatted a little bit about this, is like it's got that cool kind of hipster feel. Like it's like it matches your image. And so I think just with virtual backgrounds, if you're gonna do like an office space, which I think is really effective, make it like what you would imagine to be your cool office space. If somebody said, okay, here's a huge budget, go with your interior designer, get all the art you want, the coolest furniture ever, because it does change the feeling when we see you with that background. I'm like, oh, it's cool, you know, and it fits the image. And I think that's an important thing. Just it's a prop, but it's a already designed virtual background prop.
Yeah, and a shout out to Sana. I know their design team has created a whole bunch of virtual on-brand virtual background. One of the other things that a lot of the sales team I was working with that was really cool is they had different angles of the office. And so people who were meeting internally, it kind of looked like you were all in the office together. Like one guy had like a shot of the stairwell, like welcoming you to the office. Another had like the background that showed like there were a lot of people there. But like far away, so you couldn't see the individual faces. And so I think those are some of the things that we can keep in mind. My video just kind of paused there. That was a really funny. Did that happened for you guys as well? Like my face got stuck?
Your face got stuck for just a second.
Yeah, I think that kind of stuff is always fun. And it's very interesting where that happens. So I think that is also the risk of using these virtual. It takes up more processing speed, and it's just another trade-off that we have to make in this new world.
Dan, and you were talking about the different backgrounds, and we were talking about if people are backlit and you can't see them, and the negative intention if people are doing that on purpose. What about when you have a big group together and people don't go on video? What about the people that aren't on video during that time? What kind of messaging do you guys, what kind of messaging do you think that sends, or best practices in that realm?
For me, it's very funny. Like my wife, let's go back to my wife's example, is there's 60 people that join it live. About 55 of them are off camera. And the ones that are on there, there's like now like a mix of and we've all been on meetings like that. And it depends on the topic of the meeting. So if my wife is there as a listener, and so it's okay that she's off camera, because if she's on camera, then that is a potential source of distraction for other people, or she can't do things that she does want to do in parallel, like take care of the kid or do something else. And so I think there's always a trade-off. But if it's a company meeting, I don't think there should ever be a reason why people are not on camera, because there's so much value as we're all working from home to connect with each other. And robbing is probably too strong of a word, but you're robbing other people's experience of feeling like we're in the same room together. If it's a team meeting, you wouldn't just call into it. You would be there if you were in the office. And so I think that's one of the things that I have found when I think about video, especially as a trainer. I want everybody to feel equally engaged. I try and use the Socratic method. And I love the idea. It's like everyone's equal distance to the speaker on video, but you do take away when people are off camera. Now, the problem is if you are off camera and distracted, no one sees that. But if you're on camera and distracted, that's even worse. So really the ask is like, if you don't need to be in this meeting live to engage, then watch the recording of the video later and don't show up on an off-camera block, because it would be so much better if you'd actually be in the meeting and deliver value or be part of the conversation. And so I think I have a stronger opinion on it just because I've been on the teaching end where that's hurt more than it's helped to have people there. But what about you guys? I think that might be a stronger opinion than most. So what advice do you have or your experience going through this?
So Dan, I think about what you just mentioned about camera angles, and like like I know we've all been in meetings where like somebody's like higher, or like so, like you were saying, somebody's lower, or somebody's sort of turned at an angle and they like kind of look over. And I think that that's a huge distraction for whomever is presenting or speaking, because I think the question that has lived in my mind, if I've seen that, is like, are you paying attention? Do I need to say something differently? And so being mindful of, again, the actual angle of the camera and what's kind of going on in the movements on camera. You know, I've seen people like, again, you see sort of a slim version kind of gradually up to them. So there's all different things. And we forget that there's so many other people watching us when we're on camera, even if we're not the one speaking. Like everybody's scanning each other. We're all curious around our neighbors, right?
You're
So
right. And I think it's like as if we were still in a meeting. And it's not like you're just because you're working from home doesn't mean you have to like act how you would normally act all the time and like pick your nose or your teeth or like do like there's never a reason why you should floss on camera
no.
when you have your
Oh my
calls.
God.
So I think being conscious that it's like it still is a performance. It's like be comfortable, but like
Yeah.
people can see you, but accept that people can see you and just like act normal. Try and make this feel like you're in the same meeting. Because you're right. There's sometimes where you're on camera and like I've seen like certain computers that have the lens of the camera near the keyboard and like people are like taking notes, but all of a sudden it's like, wait, are you attacking me with your feet? Like what is going on there? And people don't usually think about it. It's like not their fault their camera is down there, but it is our responsibility to recognize that in this new world, there's some changes that we need to make and be conscious of some of the small tweaks when we're on camera that can still make for a really good experience for everyone else. Lindsay, what about you? Anything else that you've picked up from that?
I just want to reiterate what you said, that I think it's such a powerful, one of the really positive things about being on camera and having that many people is the difference of being on camera is everybody's equidistant from the speaker versus being in this huge conference room. So I think that because that's a huge advantage, and it's something I think we should take advantage of, and also maintain a level of professionalism, just as though, I mean, I mentioned it before, just as though you were in the actual meeting, because the truth is this, you're still trying to accomplish the same thing, just because the mechanism's a little bit different on how you get there. It's something that we should be using to our advantage and not thinking that this is a break because everybody's all at home. So I just think it's a cool thing to think that we're all getting the same messaging and that we're able to connect on that same level.
Yeah. Great. I love it. I know there's a lot of more topics that we can go through. I feel like these are the ones that were top of mind for me. It's like the virtual background, the differences of your live background, some tips to think about. Let's go through some like closing thoughts on this topic. So wrapping up some of the things that you've noticed recently from your meetings of people working remote, like actionable tips that people can like implement right away that can help them. So I'll start with one that I think really got me thinking is when it comes to great video, it has way more to do with light than it does with the quality of your camera. And so there's a lot of things that you can do with your existing light that's around. But the one thing that I realized that I realize now, but I didn't know at the time, is the difference between how white light, like daylight coming in from a window, affects your face or your background, or if you're doing whiteboarding, the color of white balancing, if you're mixing like a yellow light and a white light. So in my living room, for example, I have a warmer light because when I'm getting ready for bed, I don't want it to feel like I'm in a hospital room where it's like very bright daylight at all hours of the day. But if you are blending a window with that light, that's where your camera doesn't white balance correctly. And so in most cases, it doesn't really matter. But for me, I'm using a lot of whiteboard teaching, and so that does matter. And so I think that would be one thing to keep in mind. It's all about lighting, the shadows on your face or on the background. And so there's simple ways that you can just tweak how your camera looks to make sure that you don't have that Darth Vader look. You can just like turn it a little bit to the side or get away from your camera looking directly outdoors. So that's probably my one best tip about avoiding the lighting distractions. Anything else?
Am I allowed to say two?
Yeah, you can do 3. Why not? Let's go crazy.
Okay. So instead of fixing your hair while everybody's coming into the meeting, what I find to be really powerful is turn your camera on, even if you're not using Zoom or something, you're just using like QuickTime video. turn it on and like see what you look like on camera and make your adjustments or your collar or your mic or whatever you're doing. You know, like move it around a little bit. Is the doorway in the thing? Oh, I can see that. Let me move it to here. What's the angle? And get those pieces set up so that when you go live, you're ready, like you're on, you know, you're on this stage. And that's been something helpful because we just see that all the time, like little, you know, we're like, oh, my hair, I need to put a little more anti-frizz or something. So that would be one thing. And the second thing is from a distraction standpoint, and ultimately for us to stay in the zone, having a piece of paper, like Lindsay was alluding to, jot everything down that comes in and then decide where it fits in the priority list, not letting other people's urgencies get in our way, because ultimately it impacts our family time or our lunch time or our focus time if we just are responders. And so finding a capture system that works for you, I find to just be and last one, measure yourself. Know exactly how long you take to do every single thing, and that will help you with your blocking of time. So
I love it, Mia.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah.
No, I think this encompasses what both Dan and Mia were saying. Preparation is key. When you're doing things with technology, getting on, making sure the technology works, using the lighting, you know, side lighting as opposed to overhead lighting, just taking a few minutes before you get on there, make sure your sound's working, your video, it sounds very basic, but we run into a lot of issues with technology. And so preparation is key. And then I will go back to what I said about eye contact, looking in the video as opposed to looking down at what everybody's saying. It's a difficult one and it's hard. I still struggle with it and I still have to be very conscious of where I'm looking, but I think it's something you can implement right away that'll automatically allow you to connect with your audience.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great tip. It's there's so many different levels of perfecting this. You don't have to do everything all at once, but it's a very emotionally intelligent way of thinking about it. Is if you're on video, it's really about the other person. And so when you're looking in the camera, it's way worse for you to do that. Like, this is not fun for me to look directly into the lens, but I know it's much better for the people that are watching it because it kind of recreates what it would be like face to face. And so you're doing this for the other person, not for yourself, because it's better for them. And so I think there's all of these things to keep in mind as we go through it, but there's lots of different levels. So I hope this discussion is helpful to everyone who gets to watch this and start giving us some tips, things that you come up with on what helps you avoid distractions or questions that you have you want us to handle in a future video. So thank you guys. Thank you for joining me today on our live vid. I'll talk to you soon.